after looking through the discussions on PackBack and some other things, I think it's time for a little bit more detail about the idea of monopoly. The monopoly worksheet that you guys did as well was another reason for me to think that perhaps we need to spend a little bit more time on this. So let's start simple. Remember what monopoly means. Mono is one. Monopoly, one seller. It's not the same as big. Just because a firm is big doesn't make it a monopoly. This is the fundamental point I think I want to get across in this short video. You can think of lots of firms that are big, like Amazon. We'll come back to Amazon as an example in a minute, or Google, or many others. Being big doesn't mean you're a monopoly. We use that word monopoly really sloppy sometimes to mean big, but it doesn't. It means one seller of an item. Okay? And so the first question to ask when we ask, is a firm a monopoly, is, does it have any competition? If you say things like, well, Amazon's bigger than all its competition, it's not a monopoly. It has competition. So this question, the question of is there competition or could it have competition, is another version of the question. We'll come back to that in a couple minutes. Does it have competition? Are there alternatives or substitutes? That's the key question we have to ask. So when we think about Google, there are other search engines that one can use. There are other email systems than Gmail. There are alternatives. Yes, Google's big. Yes, that size gives it some advantages that other firms don't have. But the reason it's big is because it does things really, really well and people like it. Similarly with Amazon. Amazon's big, absolutely no question, but it certainly has competition. One of the things that some of you rightly pointed out on that worksheet is that almost everything, and I think everything pretty much, except Amazon's own products, pretty much everything you can buy on Amazon, you can buy somewhere else, right? You can go to Target's website. You can go to other websites to find things that also are at Amazon. I can buy my dog food at Amazon. I can buy it at Chewy. I can buy it several different places. Okay, so Amazon clearly has competition. Yes, they're big, but the big in the case of Amazon is part of what makes them so attractive. Everything is at Amazon. You can find everything there, but not only at Amazon. And plus, Amazon's size and shipping has enabled it to get things to you quickly, sometimes same day, but oftentimes next day. And that's great, right? Remember, that's a benefit to consumers. That's not a problem of monopoly. That's a benefit of Amazon simply being better than its competition. The other question we have to ask is with monopolies is the following. The reason economists don't like monopolies is if you are the single seller of a good, you have the ability to raise your price and restrict your output or lower the quality of your output, right? And consumers, if they don't have a choice, are stuck with you. They pay the higher price, right? They take the lower quality output. That's how it goes. And that, we didn't go through this in class, but we can walk through a model that shows that what this does is reduces the total number of exchanges that take place, and that means it reduces the total amount of benefits that people get from that market. So monopolies are bad because they reduce the total surplus, the total benefits that people get in the marketplace. So when we look at companies like Amazon or Google or Facebook or the rest, one question worth asking is, are they raising prices and restricting output or reducing quality? And it certainly doesn't seem like they are. In fact, the advantage of Amazon, as a couple of you noted, is that it's cheaper, right? And in terms of the quantity of its output, right, it has everything. So it doesn't seem to be the case that Amazon or even Google, which essentially gives its product away, right, or at least pays for advertising direct to consumer, gives it away, or somehow exploiting a monopoly position to jack up prices and restrict output. So the things we normally associate with monopolies just simply aren't present in those. And this is another point we need to think about. The question is it harming consumers? And so if you want to argue that Amazon or Google or whomever is a monopoly and it's bad, you have to show it's harming consumers. You have to show somehow that what it's doing is making people worse off. And I think it's really hard to make that case for Amazon, certainly over the course of the pandemic. And it's certainly hard, I think, to make that case for Google over the longer haul, that somehow something it's doing is somehow harming consumers. People have choices, right? And those choices are real. The classic example is people complaining about Facebook and posting it on Twitter. Well, Okay, Facebook, if you're going to complain Facebook's a monopoly and do it on Twitter, no, because you've just shown that there's actually Facebook does have competition. I think this point about consumers is also important, and I'm going to say this and sort of assert it without going into too much detail. But if you look at the history of monopolies and regulation, what you find is frequently it's other firms who have made the case for being a monopoly. It's that the reason we have monopolies in the first place are often because firms have gone to government and said, you need to give us a monopoly. That's the way it was with telephones in the United States in the early 20th century. AT&T became a monopoly because it went to the government and said, we're the biggest, you need to give us this monopoly. But we can certainly think about other kinds of monopolies where in fact what matters is the fact that government has made this firm a monopoly, often at its request, and that has meant that they are able to effectively block out competition. One example of this for a long time were taxi cabs in New York City, where you had to have one of the medallions to be able to operate a cab in New York City. You can think about your local cable company, which normally has a statutory monopoly from the city or the county or something like that. But what's interesting about those two examples, of course, and you're probably thinking this already, is actually now they actually face competition, right? Cable faces competition from satellite and streaming and everything else. And of course, the taxi cabs face competition from Uber and Lyft. And one of the interesting things about the phone example was one of the things that brought down the AT&T monopoly was the beginning of wireless communication, right? The beginning of both long distance and then cell phones made that the claims of the monopoly for AT&T somewhat silly. So, technological innovation and potential competition matter here, right? And substitutes matter a lot, as we were saying before. It's hard to really be too concerned about the cable monopoly when there's so many substitutes, though it might be better if they didn't have it. So when we're worried about monopoly, what we want to look for, what are the barriers to entry? What are the legal, political barriers to entry that prevent new firms or existing firms from competing with that monopoly firm? It's not the same as big. Big simply means that firm has likely been really, really successful at doing what it does. So use that word monopoly carefully. It doesn't mean big. It means one seller. And if you start a sentence that says, well, it's the biggest or it's bigger than all its competition, you've already shown that it's not really a monopoly.